You know, it's about time higher education got easier. Today's learners are building skills every day at work, online, and in life, yet too often college makes them start from scratch. Well, I'm joined today by Dr. Marie Sini, Provost and Chief Academic Officer at the University of the People, to talk about what happens when we give real credit for real learning. When we do that, college becomes not just faster and sometimes cheaper, but genuinely easier. Now, most of us have a problem with easier in higher education. It has connotations that we probably need to qualify. So that's a good place to start. One question is, why are we so afraid of making things easier in higher education? And what does it really mean to talk about making things easier and more accessible?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's a really good question. I've spent my career in kind of trying to innovate for adult and non-traditional learners. And so I think the fear about being called easier is that employers, parents, those who are coming back to school would see it as anything that's not the traditional classroom. It's less than. It's not as good of a degree. I remember running a program just for adult learners on Saturdays. It was intense. The employers in the area used to call it, I will not say the name of the institution, but they referred to us as, Smith University Light.
Right.
We were not light. We were condensed. We were intense, but others don't see it that way. So that's why I even I was a little nervous about the title of this, because it's not that we're making learning easy. We're handing out degrees. We're trying to remove barriers. We're trying to remove all the administrative stuff that can really stop you cold. It's giving students more support and clearer explanations so that they can focus on the hard work of learning.
That's a great response. I've been focusing on making things cheaper, easier, better, and people can get their head around almost everything except easy. They've equated rigor to, and I use the example of going to a personal trainer and that person starting with, this is going to be really hard and you're probably not going to make it. It really is not as engaging. As we think about technology, why are we afraid of doing that? And I think we're starting to turn the corner on the idea that accessibility includes not just cost, but delivery models and ease of access. And I appreciate the work that you're doing in that space. Talk just a minute about the University of the People and how you think you're positioning higher education with this very innovative model, and how are you thinking about this notion of access, which is clearly part of the mission?
Absolutely. So I have to give full credit really to my president and friend, Shai Reshef, whose vision this was. He really had a deep belief in his belief that education should be a right and not a privilege, and education is far too expensive, especially for the hundreds of thousands of students around the world who are refugees in very low income countries, have very little access to education as we know it in the US. And so he started the world's first tuition-free university. I was fortunate to meet him shortly after, maybe 3 years after he started it, and was just in love with the vision and mission, and was kind of a strategic advisor for him for years, and then officially joined in 2022 because he was really at a pivot point that we were moving to these large groups of people. Our model is that, we are about access. We want to open the gates of higher education, which is easy to say, but often hard to do. You have to have a scalable model and you have to be able to reach students. So we have successfully reached a lot of students who otherwise traditional universities wouldn't even know how to market to them, because we don't have a lot of funds for marketing. So we use social media, we use groups of current students who are excited about their opportunities, and they're telling other students. And so, this year we actually started the year with 170,000 enrolled students. And so, the proof is in the pudding. We don't charge tuition. We do charge for students who can afford it, some very low fees. And they have a choice, so they can take the course for a few weeks until they're decided if they really want to do it. And then they pay their assessment fee. So we give students, we don't make it so difficult for them to get in but not get out because they've paid so much money. And we give them success pathways. And so we start out by helping them with an orientation. We give them an individual program advisor. We give them some beginning, we call them foundational courses to help them learn how to be a college student. And only then, once they've been able to get through that, do we put them into degree seeking status. And so it is, it's not the case that you can just come in and get an easy degree. You still have to work and learn,
Right.
but we try to make the experience as smooth and supportive as we can at scale. We also see that around the world, there are a lot of people who want to teach on a volunteer basis. So many, I know everybody is shocked when I say that, but we have many, many people who are teaching as volunteers. Now, we do pay a small honorarium to people.
Right.
It's more like a reimbursement because we know people are using their internet and they're printing things, but it's still not what you would get as an adjunct, say, in the U.S. It's very small. And so, and some of those faculty actually don't even take it. They just return it back to the university. And so we do have some full-time faculty who we pay predominantly. These are faculty from India who are adept at computer science, math, science, some of the really, it's hard to find people in the US who will teach part-time even if you pay them at that rate. So we've got well-meaning people who care about the mission, who've come forward and helped us get where we are. We've got advisory groups from some of the major universities, people on a president's council from major universities, because I think everybody in higher ed, deep in their heart, they'd love to be at a university that gives away education or helps people access it. So, we really owe a lot to all of those people to help us with this model.
No, it's a very impressive group, and one of the things that has resonated with me is that there seems to be more of an emphasis on the demonstration of what you know and can do, rather than how you acquired those skills and that knowledge. We need to move in that direction as much as possible, especially as you think about price point. I mean, if the assessments are the primary kind of commitment from a price perspective, how you learn it is more varied. How do you think about experiential learning, where you spent a good bit of your career, as well as credit for prior learning, both in the University of the People model, but across higher education? How should we continue to push on these fronts?
Yeah. So again, great questions. We have this, I think, it's a wrong idea that people come to the classroom, whether it's online or face-to-face, with empty heads. I don't know anything about algebra. Well, that's not true. All of us have had at least one course in high school in algebra. So, but what we have is a Swiss cheese model of knowledge. Some of us have more knowledge about a topic than others, some have less, but we all have something. And what we have really mistaken, I think, in our world, is that we forget that students do come with a lot of knowledge. And so to me, what I've always really wanted to push in higher education is, how do we do good assessments of what students know already and help them actually demonstrate that? Can they do a project? Can they pass an exam? So at all the universities I've worked at, including my current one, I've always been a proponent of students should be told about the CLEP exams. Students should know that they can go to provider. I'm not here to push providers, but there are low-cost providers where they can get their gen ed credits very inexpensively, but in a high quality way. Community colleges often give great courses of various kinds that students can bring in. So I think it's important that we show students there are pathways to showing what they already know and to demonstrate that. And then what we really should be in the business of as higher education is, how do we fill their gaps to get them to the next point that they want to get to, because then they can keep coming back to learn more and more. But let's not act like students know nothing when they come to class. That you really hit a sore point, because we treat adults that way. And, my career has been adult ed, and you've done so much of that. adults bring a lot of knowledge. What they don't always bring is the bigger context of
Right.
how do you understand that knowledge that you have. And so that's a good thing for us to help them with.
Absolutely. And that brings up another side of that same issue is how do we surface that skill and knowledge in a smaller grain size than courses and degrees? We talk about stackable credentials, things that have more value and more immediate value, as well as, kind of how do we put those things together into a bigger package? And recognizing that with learner records that are owned, I mean, that's a big space to work in. But as we recognize that students come in with a lot of skills and knowledge, how do we surface those with a different currency than the currency we understand right now are courses and degrees. The
Right.
currency of the future may be more skill-based. How do we start thinking about that across our institutions?
Yeah. Well, I think that some institutions have been thinking about it, but it's just not widespread yet because we're so tied to the credit hour and the course unit, and 3 credits is a course. And a lot of that is because of federal financial aid flows in certain ways, and it's tradition. But really, if you take this all seriously, then our curriculum should always start at the higher end where you look at the big program learning outcomes of what a student should be able to know and do. And then you work backwards and you put the building blocks in place. In our past, too often in higher ed, what you'd find is that well-meaning faculty would sit down and say, well, a student getting a degree in business should have this course, and no, they should have 2 courses in finance. And it was really based on faculty sort of preference as opposed to what do we need in the real world and what do employers need. And so backward design curriculum is really the way to go. And then, actually going down to that basic building block of what are the skills and knowledge sets that students need. And if you do it right, you actually should have, these very small, the true micro credentials where it's just one little piece of knowledge that a student can take, but it's a building block to what we might call a course or a program. And then you can mix and match. But that's really, I think, the way of the future as we start putting curriculum together as opposed to what we do now.
I agree. And that backward mapping also takes some pressure and allows you to move towards this access is easier. If we don't compromise on the outcomes, we're looking for the same outcomes, it gives us much more flexibility in how you achieve those and the paths that you are able to create to get to those outcomes. We talk about employers. How do you think about interactions with employers, and how should we be advancing the alignment of the skills that are necessary in a fast-changing workforce? We'll talk about AI in a bit, but how do you address those issues of staying connected with the needs of employers rather than defaulting to faculty expertise? Sometimes that is dated. Sometimes that is not as relevant to one industry as another. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so I think there's several levels to that. It used to be that you'd have advisory panels from companies. And that's great if that's what you're doing out there in the audience. Good start. The problem there, though, is that sometimes even employers don't know what they're looking for.
That's a good
They
point.
might think they know what they're looking for, but depending on their HR folks might actually think they're looking for certain things. The managers are looking for something different, and yet somebody at a higher level might be looking at the workforce of the future and realizing there are still gaps that they want to have in there. So I think what it's called for us to do is to kind of move up that food chain and look at consolidated data. There are people looking at job skills across LinkedIn. We've got companies that will look at labor force skills, et cetera, and tapping into some of those I think is really important. And then we really have to call on employers to have better partnerships with us. Don't just tell us, hey, if you put these skills in, we'll send our employees to you. Like, really do that. I've often seen that gap. Everybody's busy, but we've really got to have serious partnerships with employers and get the flow to go both ways. I do think that AI and, Boy, we haven't talked about blockchain. Have you noticed that since AI has come along, no one says blockchain anymore, but
Exactly.
blockchain, all the ways that the data can flow back and forth so that everything is transparent. What do employers need? We can tap into, we can put it right in our curriculum. That's the dream. We're not there yet, but the dream is to use these tools that we have now in the world and make it all happen more quickly.
I think that's a great observation, and I'm surprised it took us this long to say AI, which is predominantly leading conversations. But the notion of where do we go with blockchain, and especially with the combination of learning records and employer records that are individually owned by the student or the employee, I think is a major part of this conversation moving forward. I think we didn't get distracted by AI. The opportunities were there to support students and be able to move towards more personalization with AI, but the surfacing of those skills and knowledge with learner records that are aligned with employer needs is, we're not going to work ourselves out of a job anytime soon because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that space, but it's so exciting at this point. So talk a little bit more about how you see artificial intelligence, large language models, both helping students on the front end to acquire skills and knowledge, and then surfacing those things as students progress and try to use what they're learning to be as relevant as possible and get a return on the investment as they move through their course of being a lifelong learner.
Yeah, I think those are all great questions, and it's all forming. I mean, at my university, we do have sort of a comprehensive approach to AI, and we want to use it in the places that can most help us be an efficient university and help our students learn better. So as we walk on that path, my hope is that we would like to start it with some sort of tutoring and feedback mechanism. So students, look, if you walk into any face-to-face classroom, here's some dirty laundry about higher ed, right? And you have anything more than 20 students, and I've taught my whole life, you aren't getting to know each of those students. You don't know, what they don't know, what they're struggling with. You're not sitting during office hours and working with them. They don't tend to come anymore anyway. So I think there's a fantasy that there's something about this face-to-face, that it's a special kind of teaching, and it really has not been for the most part. But I think we can actually now with AI get to a place where we're truly improving quality with scale, because if you use AI in a learning management system and you feed the material that you want it to use, I'm not talking about just letting it go out and, look everywhere, then it can actually help learn. It can learn what a student knows or doesn't know and is struggling with, and then it can feed them the right information. I get so excited because that's how people really learn. It's adaptive learning, and we really can do it now or very soon. So I think that's the first one. Secondly, if you've ever taught online, the discussion boards are not the robust kind of discourse that we hope, right? All of us know this. And generally there's a prompt and a student posts something and another student will say, oh, that's really a good response. And they'll try to add something, and it's not the back and forth we hope for. So I think good AI within some products can help faculty actually lead better program discussions, and can help the students learn how to have good discussions and become better critical thinkers. That's also very exciting. And then AI can be used, some of the things we're planning on would be, we're already using it to help us do our course development more quickly. Now, there's always human experts, always. I don't want anybody to think we've got AI designing our courses, but they can certainly go out and get us the first outline and set of materials that our experts then choose.
Right.
But that's going to only become more and more part of courseware development. And there will come a time that we can very quickly use AI to go out and get all the right skill sets that we need for somebody who's going to become a financial manager. and those can get loaded in. And as they change, AI will keep it up to date. So, I don't want to get too, like, I get excited about this, and I just, I don't want to get too excited because we've been here before, like with MOOCs,
Right.
but I think there's something really different about AI, and it will just help us increase quality at scale. And that's what my career has, been about. And I think yours too. And now we're sitting at the edge of when that can happen.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and we've talked about personalization for a long time. My colleagues remind me that I sound like a broken record, for the last decade, but I do think we're closer. I would add to that, we're experimenting with pilots at this point as well. All of those things in supporting students is useful. We're also finding some really advantages in terms of giving feedback, both formative and summative feedback to students. It puts pressure on the assessments and the rubrics aligned with these assessments, but we should be working on that anyway. And I've tried to tell our faculty that, in the early days when I was teaching courses with 200 students at a time, I knew very few of them, but I had 3, 4, 5 graduate teaching assistants. This is, an army of graduate teaching assistants on steroids, who have the ability to reach out and work directly with students, and it's a really exciting time.
Yes,
moving forward.
Absolutely is. And AI can be trained to really understand learning and how students really learn.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing some, and there are always glitches with any new technology. We're working through them as pilots and trying to make sure that we're, I think the initial thing is do no harm, and we're trying to do no harm, but it's just changing so quickly, and it's so exciting. Speaking of change in the future, what do you see 5 years from now? You guys have navigated some regulatory barriers to doing some of the things that you're doing. You're making a lot of progress, and I think we all have. What is the next 5 years? Let's just jump ahead to 2030. Seems like it's just around the corner now. I can't believe it, but kind of what do you think lies ahead for us as a sector, especially working adults?
Yeah. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in this sector, like we always have. When you're working with working adults, that you're always on the periphery of the university, and so you can sort of like do some experiments and kind of really. Now, some of us are lucky enough to be that is our university, and so you can really then innovate. I think AI is going to jump forward very quickly. I think we will see more assessments of this whole idea of personalization. AI will be able to do the assessment of what someone knows, and then we'll be able to give them just what they need to achieve a certain learning outcome. The problem, though, is going to be we need a whole infrastructure in higher ed that helps us kind of regulate and oversee the quality of that. And I am not one who ever bashes accreditors. I think they are doing great work. They are more innovative than anybody thinks. They have never stopped me from doing anything. We have this fantasy that they somehow stop innovation. They do not. They just want to make sure there's quality, right? So I think we will see changes with accreditors. I think we'll probably see different kinds of accrediting organization popping up. And I really think, and this is a tough one, but I think the role of faculty is going to change significantly. And it can be scary. It absolutely can be for the individual faculty member. But I think the smart faculty member will start using AI now to learn about it, to get ahead of it, and to actually use it for better teaching, because that's really where AI is going to shine. And if you're a faculty member who understands how to leverage AI, you'll be a better faculty member. And we still need humans. Students really don't want just an AI-driven education. They want humans that can be with them, a true guide by the side. But I think we're going to see this sweeping through these large organizations that serve adult learners, and there'll be some big changes in just what we look like. The cost of education, should go down so that more people can access it. I'm not sure with AI that it will. So one of the things I worry about is, are we going to have yet another slice of the two-tier system?
Right.
Those entities that can afford AI versus a smaller school that can't and yet has a really good mission to serve, non-traditional students. So that's one we have to really look at and try to make sure isn't happening differently. But yeah.
I think those are wonderful observations, and I share the hope and the continued dream that we open up access, we make things more accessible. You use the term clearing pathways as a proxy for easier. I'm going to keep pushing for easier as opening that conversation because I think we've ill-defined rigor in a way that's not helpful for students all the time. But I do think that the notion of clearing pathways is a really good clarification so that it is accessible across a much broader geography and demographic than we've ever thought about previously. And the future is right around the corner in us doing that. So thanks so much for your time. You got some wonderful insights. Keep up the great work. I look forward to seeing the good things that come out of your work and the University of the People. It is an exciting time. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, and keep up all your good work. You're doing great work there.
When we recognize what learners already know, we free them to focus on what comes next. It's about time we made higher education easier, not by lowering the bar, but by removing what never needed to be there in the first place.